Hey, so thanks for joining the podcast, Chiara, my sister. And
Thanks for
maybe you
having
can, yeah, it's okay, it's fine.
me. Oops.
So maybe we can start off with, um, you've been living abroad for a couple of years now. Maybe you can talk about the reasons why you decided to move, and build a life, and maybe what you needed to do to be able to move. Like, you had to save up all that stuff. Like, maybe you can tell that story first.
Yeah, sure. When did I move? I think I moved in 2016. And at that time, I was working in real estate in Ayala Land Premier, if you remember. And yeah, I was actually doing really well, but I had been doing that for like a while, and I was looking for a change of environment. Like I wasn't really happy. I wasn't feeling very fulfilled. And at the time, I had met my now husband, Seb, and we'd been dating for about a year and a half at the time. And he asked me if I wanted to try living in France with him. And for me, it was like an opportunity to, number one, just have that adventure that I always wanted. And number two, um, try living abroad also, which was one of the things that I've always wanted to do. So at the time, I had saved up enough money to be able to live abroad and try something new. So I didn't really think too much about it. Like I know it was a huge, looking back, it was a really huge decision. But at the time, I just thought of it like as an opportunity to have an adventure. And I just thought to myself, like, if it didn't work out with between me and Seb at the time, like I would have that something, an adventure, like trying out a new country to live in, which I'd never done before. So I said yes without really thinking about it too much and not having time to be too scared about it.
Okay, and like, how about like because you learned French mostly when you were living abroad already.
Oh
Maybe you can
yeah.
talk about the challenges and how it started to become easy, I guess, like, and to assimilate with,
Oh, it
a totally new culture.
it wasn't easy at all. Like it was probably one of the most difficult things I'd ever done in my life. Like I when I moved to France the first year, I moved to the city where the town really where Seb's from, called Annecy, and it's a really small provincial town in the southeast of France. So it's by the Swiss Alps. And in Annecy, at the time, there weren't most French people who were living there didn't speak English. And so, and Seb's family didn't really speak English apart from his sister. And the first few months I lived there, I was living with my parents, and they didn't speak English at all. So it was really difficult, and I didn't speak a word of French either. So that experience really forced me to kind of learn the language a lot faster. So within 3 months, I could speak, baby talk French, and then in within 6 months, I was able to carry like a pretty good conversation with the French people already. But I only did that out of necessity because in that part of France, like it was so hard to make friends. Um, it was so hard to communicate with people. So I think for anyone, if you're put in a place of necessity, you just kind of your brain kind of zones in and you just do what you gotta do.
Hmm. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And I think maybe I'll jump into the next question regarding, you working after you finish college. Maybe you can talk about you being an art student in UP and that journey, getting into makeup, going into sales, and then working in um, luxury brand company.
Yeah.
And then now you're in this, it's a lot, but like maybe you can just try to tie it all together. And now that you're in this journey of art, like just tell that story with what the things that really come out that speak to you first. Doesn't need to be the details, but the things that I guess
Yeah.
are coming up or resonating with you.
Yeah. Um, yeah, so I've worn a lot of hats in my life. I've always loved art. Ever since I was young, I've always been drawing or creating little things. Like I've always loved it. Like I've always been the creative one in the family ever since I was young. And yeah, like when I was young, people would ask me, "Oh, what do you want to be when you grow up?" And I would say, "I want to be an artist when I grow up." And it just so happened, I did end up going to UP Fine Arts, and that was the dream course that I wanted. And I wanted originally to go into to major in painting, but then our family convinced me that that's not the good choice to make. So I settled for visual communication, and that worked out because it helped me learn graphic design. So I did that. I did an internship for graphic design after. And then I don't know how I ended up in real estate being my first job. I think it was because the year before I graduated, I spent a few weeks in Europe for the first time. It was my first time to go to Paris and travel by myself. And I told myself that, wow, like this experience is so amazing. I have to come back here and try living here. I remember that. And then our cousin Carlo was working for Ayala at the time, and he said like, "Oh, well, I'm making some pretty good money here. Why don't you try it?" And again, I didn't really think about it too much. I was like, "Okay, I'll try it." And then the ball started rolling, and then 6 years later, I was still there. So, um, well, that experience is another story in itself. So I won't go too much in the details, but yeah, I ended up staying much longer than I anticipated. And I also experienced a lot more financial gain than I ever dreamed of. So towards the end, I just thought that like maybe it's time to do something that I'm actually interested in. And so yeah, when I moved to France, the goals I only set like short-term goals for myself, just so that I wouldn't get overwhelmed. So the first year I was like, okay, I'm just gonna learn French. And then the second year I was like, okay, I'm gonna get my MBA. And then so step by step, that's when I would set another goal for myself. And so after I got my MBA in Paris, I got it was a major in luxury brand management. That's what I thought I wanted at the time. And then I ended up finding a job in Louis Vuitton for e-commerce. And at the time, I thought that was my dream job. And then when I finally got there, I was like, oh shit, this is the worst job ever. It was like, yeah, it was like a very toxic environment to be in. I was dealing a lot with like the customers for the e-commerce division, and it was a very very toxic environment. So I was really really depressed. I was like, shit, I worked so hard to get here, and this is what I've been working for all this time, and I'm not happy. So I kind of had like an existential crisis at the time, and I didn't know what to do. And I was about to get married, my hair was falling off. So Seb talked to me and was like, if you're not happy, if you're this depressed, like you should quit your job. So I did, again without really thinking about it and not really having a plan. And so I quit, and it was the best decision I've made because it gave me a chance to really work on myself and reflect. But then the pandemic happened. So I was like, oh, okay, now what am I going to do? And during the pandemic, like all of us, it was a really, really difficult time. So the first few months, I really just did a lot of self work. And somehow that led me to finding my passion again for art, painting again. It started with just like doing little paintings for myself just to release the stress. And then after a while, I started just challenging myself a bit more, moving on to um, bigger and bigger paintings. And then finally, I said to myself, like, this is what you really love. This is what you've always loved since the beginning. I think it's now. I think it's time, to pursue something that you actually love. And so that's how I got into it again.
So thanks, Kiara, for sharing that. And I'm curious though, like you're at the point where in a way you have the skills, but you are starting over. Like building your brand, building your work.
Yeah.
How do you deal with I guess the financial part? Also, how do you treat it as work? Because you are trying to make it a livelihood. So maybe you can just share what are your, I guess, rituals that help you get into work mode. What's it like day to day? In a week. What's your How do
Yeah.
you balance work and life, and at the same time, grow you're the business basically. So how do you do that?
Yeah, sure. Not gonna lie, that's the most difficult part of the whole experience, especially in the beginning. The hardest part for me was starting. Like that was really like my biggest enemy was and still is, I think, myself. And I think people close to me, who are close to me, know that about me. Um, so to answer the first question, like about treating it as a business, I had a really difficult time with that. Because yeah, art has always just been like something that I love to do. So I think that's the reason why I never thought of pursuing it really um, as an actual career, because I didn't associate doing what I loved with making money. And I think a lot of us have that same construct in our minds. And so I had to kind of rewire my brain into to thinking about it differently. Like, yeah, why I think that's actually the formula for success and leading like a happy and purposeful life. It's to find what you do and to actually use that to create value for others and value for yourself in society. And that translates into creating money. And I didn't believe that in the beginning, but after doing a lot of self work, I did a lot of like, personal development programs. And I realized, this is what people are actually looking for. Like that's the goal in the work life balance situation. Like when you do what you love, you're able to master your skills and get so good that you love what you're doing, so you continue doing that, and you're creating value for yourself and for other people because they're enjoying what you create. And so in turn that gives you financial gain because people are happy to share or into to partake in whatever you're creating. And so once I kind of adopted that mentality, that was when I was able to decide that I wanted to make this my career, and that it was time for me to dedicate my time into doing something that I really loved and not feeling guilty about making money with it. So
Yeah.
And actually, when I started thinking that way, you know, things started kind of falling into place without really me having to plan for it so much. Like when the last time I went to the Philippines, I landed my first commission by a family friend. And, you know, I wasn't looking for commission work. Like she just kind of called me and invited me to her house and said like, oh, I want you to paint something for my house. And what she was asking me to do was like the biggest painting I've ever had to paint. Like I've never painted large scale before. And she was asking for like a 6-foot painting. So, and then, yeah, I guess that's the pattern of my life. Like when something kind of falls into my lap, I don't really think about it too much. I just kind of accept it and just see what I can do with it. So I said yes. And then, you know, after saying yes to that, other things kind of started falling into my lap, like the Grounded gallery, the exhibit, which you're a part of also. They reached out and asked if I wanted to be part of their collective. And of course, I said yes, because I'd never been part of any kind of artistic group before. And I was looking for, you know, to meet people who are also creative and also in the same space as me. And that was also a success, surprisingly. You know, I started just painting, and at the time I was playing around with watercolors just because that's what I had lying around. And I kind of just channeled the whole experience into that collection. And I believe the second part of that exhibit will be in art fair, which you'll be a part of too next in March.
Yeah. So I'm curious though,
Did I
like
answer your
how,
question?
yeah, you did. I'm curious about how you deal with the, because you know naman how it is. When you do, even if you love what you do, there's still days when you don't feel inspired or it feels tedious, especially with art. What are your hacks on how to deal with procrastination, boredom, laziness, all these things that a lot of people don't talk about, but it's very real, especially when you're doing things that you love.
Absolutely, for sure. I was talking about this. I talk about this often with my friend Mikey Silva, who's also an amazing artist. Um, and procrastination for me was my biggest block. Like I would, because my artistic style is very hyper realistic, so it takes a lot of concentration, a lot of many hours to be able to achieve the result that I want. And especially with mediums like watercolor, where it's not a forgiving medium at all. You, for me anyway, the process is like I kind of have to plan a lot. Like I have to plan in my head how I'm going to plot out the layers of my strokes, my brush strokes. So it's a lot of work, and I kind of psych myself out because I know how many hours it's gonna take, and 100% of the time it takes much longer than it does in my head. So that always kind of scares me, and so I put it off because I know it's not an easy task. So when I say to myself like, this happens a lot, like I'll say like, okay, I'm gonna dedicate this time block to just painting. And then the thing is I don't have a studio, and so I paint usually at home in my living room. And so when I decide that I'm going to paint, my brain just kind of drags me to do an easier task, like, oh, the dishes need to be cleaned, or like, oh, I need to do my laundry. So I do like those mindless tasks first, and I end up pushing back what I really wanted to do. And so yeah, I have to deal with that. And for the first year, or the first half year really, it was super hard for me to get the rhythm. Like I had never really been without a boss. Most of my working life I was in a corporate job. So there was always like a manager motivating me to do my work. And now, like as an artist, it's your job to motivate yourself and to discipline yourself. And that's the hardest part. That was the hardest part for me. And I'm still dealing with it even now. Like, I'm not really great at time management and this self-discipline. So in the beginning, it was really just trying to do the minimum that your body possibly can, and then building from there. Like, I was like, okay, just so that I won't psych myself out into like how much work this is gonna take, I'm just gonna do the first step. Just focus on like the first, like focus on preparing your desk. So I lay out all my paint, and then so the next time I'm there, I'm like, okay, now you can prepare like the foundation of your painting. So I'll sketch out the outline of what I do. So I do it like little by little instead of like trying to do everything in one go. And I find that it makes it easier for me to just sit down and do the work. Because when I think about everything that I have to do, then I get scared and then I end up doing something else.
Yeah. I think
So
that's
yeah,
super real for creatives. But I
yeah,
think that even if you procrastinate, you still get it done. I think it's just getting it done, even if it changes. Sometimes you're in rhythm, sometimes you're not. I think even with work naman, it's always like that. But it's harder to police yourself. But I'm
yeah,
curious, especially
exactly.
now, you're talking about you'd recently entered the NFT world, exploring crypto art, and maybe you can share your experience so far, especially with yeah, it's a whole new world, and you're also practicing your skills, joining contests. Maybe you can share a bit about that.
Yeah, it's definitely an entirely new universe, really. And I'm still really like a baby in that space. Like, I wouldn't claim to be an expert at all. I'm learning so much every day. Um, but yeah, it's just one of those things where, um, when you're first introduced to it, it's just like, whoa, like it's just like a complete mind fuck that it's really intimidating to even try to take that first step to get into the door. So, it took me a long time to actually even be open-minded to the space because I was so intimidated by it. So it took me a couple of months. And then eventually, like, I think it also depends on who introduces you into the space and how it's explained to you. So I had the luxury of being introduced to it by, our cousin Carlos, who explains things very well and very clearly. And he made it a lot less scary for me to try to navigate the space. And also another key person would be Amak, Alex Maceda, who you know also. She's a traditional NFT artist in Joshua Tree, and she holds like workshops for onboarding traditional artists into the NFT space. She helps us like understand how to transition our traditional practice into the crypto world, and she even helps us like understand why the NFT space lives primarily in the Twitter space and not on Instagram, like those things. So those two key people, Alex and Carlos, thank you so much. You really, you guys held both my hands coming into this and just helped me feel a bit more safe in asking questions, because there's a lot of questions to be asked. So yeah, I think number one tip is to not expect to understand everything in the first few weeks, even. expect that there are a lot of things that you're not going to understand, but the best way to learn is to just do and not think too much. Well, that's the best way that I learn anyway. So yeah, I kind of just jumped into it. I started by attending the workshops of Alex, and that really helped me a lot. And then the next step was to create my Twitter account. And then I started reading up on like articles, watching videos, and I started trading just a little bit, like just the blue chip cryptocurrencies, so Bitcoin, Ethereum. And then from there, thanks to Amak, I started looking at other artists who were doing traditional studio practice and then moving into NFTs and how they were doing it. So I just entered the space as an observer. And then later on, I was like, okay, like now I feel a bit more ready. And so I'd never done digital art before, ever. And I got an iPad. Thank you, Chief. And that's the first time that I tried my hand at digital art. And the way that I approached it was I approached it in the same way that I would a traditional painting. So the way I paint on my iPad using Procreate is
Okay, the mic's strong.
okay. The way I approach the digital art is the same way that I approach painting on a real life canvas. And I actually learned a lot because yeah, with digital painting, you can create layers, you can kind of understand how colors work together, how different underpaintings would work. And you can, yeah, you have the freedom to play around more because if you do a wrong stroke, you can just delete it and start over.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And
Thanks,
so,
thanks,
yeah,
Karis.
I started with that. And yeah, my first collection is digitally painted using traditional techniques.
Yeah, thanks, Chiara, for sharing all of that. And to wrap this thing up, I guess let's ask an existential question. If you knew you had 1 year left to live and you're in exactly where you are, nothing changes, but you just know that in a year, you go to the other side, so what would you do? Maybe like you don't need to break it down, just more of like how would you want to spend the last year of your life? Like what would be the important stuff you would, the daily.
Yeah. 1 year to live. Man, I guess I would just go all out into like hedonism, like, just enjoy life with the people that I love. Yeah, I'd spend all my time just eating really good food, feeling good about myself, traveling to all the places that I've wanted to see. Hopefully that year that which will be my last to live will be COVID free. So I could like travel everywhere with like you guys, with Seb, and just yeah, explore the world, make new experiences, eat great food, dance a lot, sing a lot, be happy. I think in the end, that's all that really matters.
All that really matters. All right.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Karis.